印尼警方破获庞大跨境婴儿贩卖案，其中至少10个被卖到新加坡。
Memang trafficking terhadap anak ini masih mewarnai di Indonesia, terutama di dalam negeri.
想在印尼领养孩童，是否有钱就行？
It really felt as if like you're paying the birth mom for the child. It's like she's really selling the child.
印尼和新加坡如何正视这一问题，维护孩童福利？为了理解这个问题扎根有多深，联合早报团队在印尼和新加坡分头展开调查。经过多个星期的努力，我们终于在印尼找到了第一条线索。安娜。
I was with my Dutch parents.
安娜在印尼创办非营利组织 Mencari Orang Tua Kandung， 协助和自己一样在年幼时被送养到海外的成年人寻找亲生父母。
So this is me in the orphanage, and I'm the one in the middle who's crying, the smallest child. And then this is the picture they put on my passport to go to the Netherlands. This was my boarding pass. There was no seat, but I was already 2.5 years. But at that time it was a long flight. And then I arrived in the new family. And I always wonder who are my parents.So as a child and young adult, I grew up in the Netherlands. I knew that I was different because I grew up in a Dutch family with Dutch brothers, and they had a white skin. So I was the only one with the darker skin. But also my Dutch parents told me I'm from Indonesia. I remember that I cried sometimes or feeling empty and wanted to know who is my real mother.My Dutch mother said, then wait until you're 18 and then we can go back to Indonesia. First time I come to Indonesia, and suddenly you see people who look like you. We went to Bogor and then we met the head of a village, and he knows actually about my family. They asked me, do you want to see your mother? And then I said yes.In one day, we managed to find my family. She said that she hoped one day that I came back.
And you did?
Yes, I did.
What was going through your mind? Did you anticipate what it would look like?
It's like a bit roller coaster, and it feels strange because 18 years you never see them, and I lost the language.So the communication was also difficult, but there was a feeling that directly says, oh, these are my parents, because it's so natural.
Did your biological mother share with you back then why she had to give you away?
Yeah, well, actually it was not the purpose that I end up in the Netherlands. She didn't know. She went to Jakarta to work, and she gave me temporarily to someone to take care for me.But at the time she wants to pick me up, I also already was gone. Well, in my paper stated that she was aware, but she never saw any organization, a notaris, or signed anything. In the 80s, the situation in Indonesia at the time was that a lot of mothers maybe live in poverty. And there was a demand from the West. People who can't have a child, they wanted to have a baby, and then I believe they created a market here, and there is money involved, so it becomes like a baby business.
There have been some cases of children being trafficked to Singapore. Could you share with us your thoughts on that?
Yes, it brings me also back to my time. There was a syndicate, or there was child trafficking.Because other people want to have a child, and the people here, they thought they can have a job to help other people to have a child. So again, there is money involved. For me, when you're poor, it should not be an issue that you have to give your child to someone who has money.
由于贩婴网络往往秘密运作，并经常被当局捣毁，印尼目前没有这类团伙的官方总数。然而，西爪哇警方在2025年接获受害家长通报后，破获一起备受瞩目的特大贩婴团伙案。 该团伙的操作范围横跨雅加达、万隆、坤甸到新加坡，并走私超过34个婴儿，有至少10个以领养名义被贩卖到新加坡，每名婴儿要价超过1万新元。为了掌握该案件的最新调查进展，我们到万隆市采访了西爪哇警方代表。然而，我们在拍摄隔天接到警方通知，说案件仍在审理，之前所做的访问内容因此都不能播出。我们事后联系上印尼儿童保护委员会，请代表针对印尼走私儿童问题发表看法。
Memang trafficking terhadap anak ini masih mewarnai di Indonesia, terutama di dalam negeri ya. Pertama, ibu-ibu ini mereka adalah korban kekerasan seksual. Kalap, tidak tahu harus bagaimana, pulang juga dia pasti akan tidak diterima oleh keluarga. Yang kedua, betul secara ekonomi bahwa dia bilang saya nggak tahu akan hamil lagi Mbak, gitu. Saya tidak bisa menghidupinya gitu. Daripada saya buang kemana-mana, dia bilang, atau saya gugurkan, ya lebih baik saya kasih orang dan jelas di mana anak saya berada.
根据专员的观察，贩婴交易中所涉及的金额背后隐藏着令人发指的暴力。
Kalau yang suku anak dalam itu berhenti di 85 dari 3 juta, ya bayangkan 3 juta, 15 juta, lalu 30, nah itu udah berapa tangan tuh. Sementara yang ke Singapura ini yang lebih besar ya, yang saya temukan itu hampir berapa? 250 jutaan. Semakin banyak pihak terlibat itu semakin mahal. Ada dokumen-dokumen yang menunjukkan memang anak ini sudah dilabeli harga gitu ya. Ini jelas jual beli kok gitu.
专员进一步提到，非法送养和走私孩童问题只是冰山一角，更令人担忧的是，个人或群体通过贩婴所图谋的利益，远不止表面的物质财富。
Makanya perdagangan manusia itu adalah kejahatan yang luar biasa transnasional karena kaitan nyawa manusia itu sulit ya untuk diungkap gitu, dikendalikan. Dan di dalam CRC kita tahu ada yang disebut dengan transplantasi organ tubuh. Artinya bagaimana anak-anak ini menjadi aset kemanfaatan yang bebas dan tidak terbatas. Ini yang menjadi suramnya TPPO dalam perdagangan bayi.
我们过后联络2家印尼官方认证的孩童领养机构，询问外籍人士的领养条例。2家机构都指出，外籍领养人得先符合一系列法定条件，才有资格提交申请。当中就包括在印尼合法居住并工作满2年，向其本国政府或其驻印尼大使馆索取领养同意书，是结婚满5年的合法夫妻等等。在新加坡，我们找到2018年从印尼领养孩童的 A 女士，向她了解当时的领养过程。
So I contacted a few agencies. Some of them specialize in children from Malaysia, and some of them specialize in Indonesia. There were also others from China, and that one had a really long wait list. So to me, I decided, I don't necessarily have to adopt a Chinese baby. Okay, I was open to Malaysian and Indonesian babies. The moment I expressed interest in adoption, they started to send me tons of photos of babies who were up for adoption. And it really felt like I was shopping for a baby. It was like, quickly choose one before it gets taken away, that sort of thing. And it wasn't a very nice feeling. Once you confirmed which child you wanted to adopt, then you had to pay a deposit first. Then the agent arranged for me to meet the baby. So I flew to Indonesia to see her. And then got to spend a day with her. I had to show my HSR. I had to understand the so-called installments that he had. Some agents actually are okay with installment. So that one worked well because, to cough up 30 over K at one go is quite, hefty, right? Oh. Whereas some others, they will insist that you have to pay up front the whole amount. Then they will just proceed with the adoption. Yeah.
What was the 30K spent on?
I also found out later on when I was given the receipts by my agent to submit to MSF. Okay, a chunk of it went to the mother.
Do you ask the agent why was a big chunk given to the mother.
They would say it's a compensation. They would say because the mother had to go through health checkups and all that. Yeah.
So basically, it's like a question mark.
That was a question mark. If you don't mind me saying, it really felt as if like you're paying the birth mom for the child. It's like she's really selling the child.
But this wasn't communicated to you.
Not that clearly. They said they will give a fee to the mom, like just to cover the medical fees and everything. Yeah, but when I saw the amount, that was actually...
Didn't make sense.
It didn't really make sense. I kind of felt like I was trusting my agent to do the right thing, to ensure everything, is legal. Yeah, that kind of thing. Everything, it has to be done proper.
为了理解本地私营领养机构的跨国领养程序，我们向 A 女士呢索取了她当时所聘用的这位代理的联络方式。不过呢 ，A 女士就说她的代理已经退休，所以不方便透露她的联络方式。我们还尝试联系涉嫌走私印尼婴儿的 Blissful Adoption Agency， 但是呢，他们的号码似乎已经注销。其他的领养机构则拒绝受访。
Would you want to share, like, for the child, which is your current daughter, what was her?
Okay, her background. So for me, the most important reason is why was the child being given up for adoption? How is the health of the child? So what I was told by my agent actually at the time was that they already had one gender each. So she happened to be the third child, and they are from a small kampung. I think poverty was one issue they were worried about. So yeah, they couldn't bring up the child. So that's why they put out for adoption. It was only later on that I realized that could actually have been a half-truth. And when I was going through it and looking at the certs and the letters they had signed, I realized that they only stated they had one child. So that was one false information I got. She may not necessarily have been the second child. I felt that perhaps the parents may have had more children that they had put up for adoption.
针对印尼集团贩卖婴儿到新加坡的案件，联合早报向社会及家庭发展部询问调查进展。该部门发言人书面回复表示，新加坡正持续协助印尼进行调查，并指自2025年7月媒体报道此事后，当局便不再收到新的领养印尼非亲属儿童申请。我们也提出对跨国领养程序的疑虑，其中包括领养人必须得在印尼居住2年的规定。发言人强调，我国要求领养者及机构遵守孩童的原籍国法律，但如果他国收养规定与新加坡不同，我国无权强制执行。我们后来成功联系上一家本地领养机构，向他们了解跨国领养程序的细节。
Stepping Stones is the one and only social enterprise providing adoption placement services in Singapore. So a child who is suitable for adoption is one who is often born out of abnormal circumstances, and anything that would place the biological mother or even the parents in a very difficult situation should they go ahead to raise the child themselves. This part is the critical part where Stepping Stones would come in and dialogue with the biological parent or parents.
To make sure that child is not forcefully removed from his or her home, first we make sure our overseas contact doesn't do adoption for a living. So our partners, we have a long stable relationship with our partners who are mainly shelter homeowners. We also make visits when there's a child up for adoption, because bio mother and bio father need to understand that child is coming to Singapore, will be raised in Singapore. The bio mom also needs to understand that she will be interviewed by MSF before child comes into Singapore. She has to be agreeable to make sure also that she knows there's no monetary exchange. I think we've encountered a few when they call us and they said, oh, we need to receive this amount. So our advice is, no, we cannot give you cash, but what we can cover would be things like your medical, anything pertaining to her delivery.
I cannot imagine to give up a child. The circumstances must be very worse. So I hope that in the basic, the circumstance can be better. So this is a social environment so that you can take care of your child. And if there is no market, then there will be no money offered. When there is money involved, there will be the situation that child will be trafficked. Then I think also people have to find other solutions. I hope it's always in the interest of the child.